Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for day one of Carbon Sequestration from the Ground Up, Opportunities in Northeastern Farms and Forests. I'm Rona Cohen. I'm the program manager of our Energy and Environment program at CSG East, and we are really pleased to be co-hosting this event with Scenic Hudson and bringing together our two communities today. I'd like to recognize my colleagues who are working behind the scenes to make things run smoothly today. Jack Aitken and Allison Braver for CSG, and Andy Bicking and Heather Eckert for Scenic Hudson. So before we get started, I would just like to go over a few logistical details regarding today's program. We are recording this event and it will be posted on our website early next week. There will be a 5-minute break in between each session and ample time for a Q&A. You can submit questions by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And when submitting questions, please include your name and affiliation. At CSG East, we are sponsoring this event through our newly formed State Legislative Climate Alliance, which is a working group of the CSG East Energy and Environment Committee, and it is open to all CSG members throughout the US and to our Canadian International Associate members. The Alliance provides nonpartisan education, best practices, and innovative state policy solutions to help officials address the challenges posed by climate change. And so to kick things off this morning, I am really pleased to turn it over to the founding chair of our State Legislative Climate Alliance, Massachusetts State Senator Mark Pacheco. Senator Pacheco has been a tremendous supporter of CSG and a leader on climate policy at CSG and in the state of Massachusetts. I should also add that Senator Pacheco is the Dean of the Massachusetts Senate, having represented the 1st Plymouth and Bristol District as state senator since 1993. Senator Pacheco, I thank you for your leadership, and I turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Rona, and good morning to everyone on our call this morning. Rona Cohen, as everyone that has been associated with CSG knows, is the person we go to get the expertise that many of us in the legislature would like to access in determining what policies we will take up as we move forward. And I want to thank Rona and all the CSG staff that have helped us put today's program together. We have over 160 legislators from throughout the country, mostly from the Northeast, that have signed up for portions of today's program, and that is a great sign. I hope everybody had a great Earth Day, and we are excited about the events that took place yesterday and the announcements that the Biden administration has made, and we look forward to working with our federal partners as we move forward. The CSG State Legislative Climate Alliance will be hosting many more programs such as this program over the next several months. And I would urge all of you who have become members of the Climate Alliance to please stay in touch, give us your ideas, let us know what you think and topics that you would like to know more about and have us delve into. As we think about today's topic, carbon sequestration from the ground up, opportunities in Northeastern farms and forests, obviously carbon sequestration and the natural and working lands will be a major part of what we do both nationally, internationally, and I know in our own states. In Massachusetts, for example, it will represent a full 15% of our carbon reduction requirements for 2050. So we need to make sure we get it right. And to help us do that, I am pleased that we are partnering today with Scenic Hudson. And I want to introduce one of our partners for today, Ned Sullivan, who has served as president of Scenic Hudson for more than 2 decades. He previously served as an environmental commissioner of the state of Maine and managing director of the Bank of Boston. We're so pleased that Scenic, Hudson, and the Northeast Carbon Alliance have partnered with the Council of State Governments in hosting this conference. Scenic Hudson has become a pioneering force in natural climate solutions, building on its track record of protecting nearly 20,000 acres and 135 farms. Ned was a founder of the Northeast Carbon Alliance to bring together farmers, forest managers, scientists, and policy leaders to advance climate change through natural solutions. He also serves on the New York State Climate Action Council's Agriculture and Forestry panel, helping the state develop policies and actions to achieve its zero carbon goal. So it's a pleasure for me to hand over the virtual podium here to Ned Sullivan at this time. Ned, take it away.
Thank you, Senator. We stand at a momentous crossroad when the threat to the planet of climate change is more grave than ever in human history. But the opportunity to stop and reverse the crisis is equally unprecedented. In yesterday's Earth Day Global Summit, President Biden pledged to cut in half US carbon emissions by the end of the century, the end of the decade, and called on his fellow leaders to do their part. We have governors and legislatures in states across the country, including Governor Cuomo in New York, passing legislation to achieve zero carbon emissions on aggressive timetables. And we have visionary legislators, including Senator Pacheco and Assemblymember Dee Dee Barrett of New York, and others who are with us today and stepping up at this historic moment as champions of climate change legislation to reduce emissions from all sources, including our natural and working lands. Thank you, Senator Pacheco, for your leadership and for co-hosting this important conference. It is my hope that we use our time together to build on and open new communication and collaboration among state legislators and executives and private sector leaders to foster regional action to achieve the net zero carbon emissions that many states in the US are now urgently targeting. These goals cannot be attained without concerted action to protect our forests and to convert our agricultural lands from carbon emission sources to carbon sinks. The Northeast Carbon Alliance was first brought together by Scenic Hudson in 2019 in partnership with Abby Rockefeller and Ben Banks Dobson in support of their project to shift some 2,000 acres of farmland from conventional to regenerative practices. Our alliance has grown to include 5 research farms in New York, New Jersey, and Massachusetts, leading forest managers, scientists, and policy leaders from across the country. We're working to accelerate the implementation of carbon sequestration practices and to gather and share the scientific data that will demonstrate those that are most effective from mountaintop to ocean floor. The Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI, which over the past decade has helped drive down carbon emissions in the utility sector in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states, can serve as an inspiration to our collective efforts, demonstrating what can be achieved by working together across state boundaries. We can also explore how we can work with the Biden administration in a federal-state partnership to achieve rapid results. And of equal importance is the opportunity to learn from the Black, Indigenous, and people of color who were the first to practice what we are now calling regenerative land management. We look forward to working in partnership with them and to ensure that they have access to land, to grants, and other resources needed to realize the full potential of the agriculture and forest sectors to reduce carbon emissions. I too would like to thank Rona Cohen of the Council of State Government, Scenic Hudson's Andy Bicking for their indispensable role in organizing today's conference. I'd like to acknowledge NECA's project manager, Heather Eckert, and my board members, staff, and NECA members who are with us today and playing such an important role. I'm now pleased to introduce our two keynote speakers, Dr. Sacha Spector and Jennifer Phillips. Sacha is the program director for the environment at the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation. Sacha previously worked for Scenic Hudson as director of conservation science, where he spearheaded our climate strategies. At the Duke Foundation, Sacha has emerged as the national leader in supporting and inspiring natural climate solutions through the U.S. Climate Alliance, through the Nature Conservancy's work to aggregate carbon credits by multiple land managers for sale in involuntary markets, and through numerous other actions. I'm also pleased to introduce Jen Phillips, Senior Policy Advisor with the U.S. Climate Alliance, where she leads the Alliance's natural and working lands and resilience work. Her work there has been critically important in maintaining progress toward the U.S. commitment made at the Paris Climate Accord through state action in response to the previous administration's withdrawal from the accord. Jen previously worked in the California Governor's Office of Planning and Research and at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Sacha. Dr. Sacha Spector.
Thanks, Ned. Thanks for that really kind introduction. It's really a pleasure to be with you and with the entire group this morning. I want to thank you all for the invitation to be here. It's really exciting to be in the midst of a group grappling with natural climate solutions or natural working lands solutions on the day after our national commitment that was increased, as you mentioned, including a really strong mention of this work within the NDC. And I think Jen will mention that in just a few minutes. I'm going to share my screen to do a bit of backgrounding for you all this morning, and please let me know if that looks right to you. Does that screen show up correctly? Okay, great, terrific. Well, again, it's great to be here, and I want to just thank Jen for co-presenting with me this morning. Jen has been doing incredible work with all of the Alliance states on natural and working lands. But I thought maybe we'd start off by, sorry about that, just by level setting a little bit and describing just exactly what natural climate solutions are, because there's a lot of terminology that sounds different in the popular discourse, whether it's natural climate solutions or natural and working lands or nature-based climate solutions. All of them refer to the same set of interventions, essentially conservation, restoration, and improved land management strategies that do two things: reduce emissions from the land and remove carbon from the air. And I say that because it's really important to recognize that there are two parts to the climate equation when it comes to working lands, unlike the power sector or transportation sectors. Science tells us that we need to zero out our emissions by the middle of this century in order to have any hope of remaining on an under 2 degree, let alone a 1.5 degree pathway. That means getting to net zero greenhouse gases by 2050, much of which we're familiar with comes from rapidly reducing emissions from energy, transportation, and industrial sectors. But also the agriculture and land use and forestry sectors, which collectively are about 11 or 12% of our national emissions. And we need to get the net negative after 2050. Now, the question about what net represents is a combination of reductions of through conventional abatements like energy shift, as well as natural climate solutions to reduce the emissions coming off of the land, but also needing negative greenhouse gas emissions or carbon removals. Right? So there's a growing recognition that carbon removals are essential to the climate equation. And by the middle of this century, they're going to have to be in the order of tens or even hundreds of gigatons per year, depending on what our emissions pathway is over the next couple of decades. Natural and working lands or natural climate solutions are critical to that, in especially ensuring that there's not an overshoot scenario to getting to 1.5 degrees where we shoot over 2 degrees or more. We're going to need hundreds or up to 1,000 gigatons of carbon removal over the course of this century. And so natural climate solutions mitigation is an essential component of making up the balance of emissions that we're not able to abate, as well as reduced emissions from the land sector. And lands are really critical. Again, I just want to drill this part of the climate equation in, so that you don't, if nothing else, you take this away. Nature is the only abatement technology that both reduces emissions and enhances sequestration. It works on both sides of the balance sheet. Effectively, globally, land produces 5 gigatons of emissions a year, but it sequesters over 11 gigatons, leaving us with a net of almost 15% of global emissions being captured by the land. It's actually relatively similar numbers here in the United States, where forests currently capture almost 15% of our annual emissions at the national scale. Nature is also the only technology that we can deploy to achieve these abatements or emission reductions that have huge benefits for conservation objectives as we protect habitats and restore places and change practices in our agricultural systems, but also have enormous co-benefits for water and health and our local economy. And all of these things are aligned with sustainable development goals or other kind of societal goals that we have here in the Northeast and in the US. And I think it's been very clear at the federal level that the framing around our new national commitment is very much aligned with economic recovery, jobs, 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 and all of the other benefits that addressing climate change comes with. Natural and working land solutions are deeply tied to that agenda as well. $1 million invested in restoration, sustainable forestry, for example, supports 40 jobs. That's a multiplier much higher than most other sectors, and that's just an example. Drilling down to the US, I've been speaking at the kind of global scale quite a bit. Drilling down to the US, a study that we helped support by the Nature Conservancy and a whole other set of academic institutions modeled that here in the US, about 20% of our overall emissions reductions can be achieved through natural climate solutions or on natural and working lands. That's agriculture, a little bit more on the forest side, and a small but important segment in the blue carbon. That's equivalent to removing all the cars and trucks on the road from in the entire country, and then some. Millions of cars, trucks for forests, agriculture, grasslands, and coastal habitats. That study drilled in a little bit further to look at where these potentials are. This is the national scale. You'll notice that there's substantial opportunity in the forest, agriculture, and wetland sections, but especially forests and agriculture. And these bars are representative of the total climate mitigation potential of each of these 21 pathways: reforestation, natural forest management, avoided forest cover, forest conversion, etc. The darker the bar, the more expensive it is. The lighter part of the bars are the cheaper parts of our abatement. And you can see that cover crops and agriculture, for example, the second bar down under ag and grassland, is extraordinarily cheap and has hundreds of millions of tons or 100 million tons of climate mitigation potential. Similarly, natural forest, improved natural forest management and reforestation have huge potentials at relatively low cost, under $50 per ton. The upshot of this, of course, is there are many, many ways to get this done, and that the blend of solutions appropriate for each state or each region is going to look differently than this. And Jen is going to dive into that a little bit further as well. Each of these comes, and this will be hard for you to see potentially on the screen, although it's better when you're not sitting in the back of a ballroom and you're sitting right at your own monitor. Each of these different pathways comes with a stack of co-benefits to air quality, biodiversity, soil, and water. And you can see just behind the labels to this graph that, that most of these interventions come with a really thick and healthy stack of these co-benefits. I'm gonna get out of the way and let Jen drill down into the Northeastern context, and especially relative to her work with states through the Climate Alliance. I just want to sort of leave with a view up to the federal level of what the opportunities are for states to be helping shape the agenda, help make sure that programs are linking to the states. There's enormous federal momentum at this moment through executive actions like yesterday's revised NDC or the 30 by 30 executive order, but also $50 billion proposed in the for resiliency in the infrastructure bill and the Civilian Climate Corps. These are all things that are directly addressing natural climate solutions. There are probably 24. I've highlighted a few active pieces of legislation on the Hill right now, developing tax incentives, direct payments, incentive payments for reforestation, urban forests. Climate Stewardship Act is sort of a roll-up of many of these ideas, but it's quite impressive. All of that is driving toward what was our last NDC, and now we know will be more, is millions of acres of avoided forest loss across the country, more than 1 million, almost 2 million acres of additional reforestation, and hundreds of millions of acres of agriculture and forest lands moving into improved management and regenerative practices. So I think there's an incredible opportunity at the federal level to be partnered with the states on this, because so much implementation will be happening at that scale. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen to drill down into the Northeastern context a little bit.
Great, thank you, Sacha. And great to be here. Thanks for that introduction, Ned. It's wonderful to be here a day after Earth Day and a day after an exciting suite of announcements from our president. So I'm gonna share my screen, or attempt to, and let's see. Okay, can you all see that? Oh, sorry. Great. So Ned framed out a little bit about me, but I work at the US Climate Alliance. I am our senior policy advisor leading our natural and working lands, or natural climate solutions work, as well as our climate resilience work. And I've been here since July, and it's just been such an exciting organization to work at so many different scales and learn so much about the different sort of actions our states are doing across the country. A little bit about the Alliance. So we are a bipartisan coalition of about 25 governors that are really working to uphold the Paris Agreement goals. As Ned mentioned, we were formed back in 2017 when our previous administration announced plans to withdraw the country from the Paris Agreement, and quickly Washington, New York, and California mobilized to stand up the Alliance. So in a few short years, we're now 25 strong governors that are really working to address climate action on the ground and scale that up to a national and international level. So with this footprint, we represent 55% of the country population-wise, 40% of emissions, and 60% of our GDP. Next slide. Okay, sorry. So this was teed up, but yesterday, the US announced our NDC, or our nationally determined contribution to the Paris Agreement. So, you know, they sort of doubled down on their ambition and announced that by 2030, we would be reducing 50 to 50% of our emissions below our 2005 levels. So this is a historic moment for our country. You know, a few short months into this administration, we have really signaled at all levels that we are committed to this fight for so many reasons, and we are doubling down right now. So it's an exciting moment, and I know many of our states were celebrating that moment over Twitter and their various events that they were participating in at Climate Action Week this past week. So the other exciting thing about the NDC, and these are just a few of President Biden's comments that he made yesterday as he was announcing the NDC, but a couple exciting things about it is, one, this NDC, so this national contribution, is one of the first times that we see a specific call out to really working collaboratively with states, regions, and cities across the country to achieve these goals. So it is a direct acknowledgement that the administration recognizes they cannot do this without working directly with governments and partners at all scales. So it's a really exciting moment to hear the administration sort of reflect on what we've been doing over the past many years, or past 4 years, and how they want to work collaboratively, and success will only be achieved collaboratively. So that's one piece. The other exciting piece is the NDC calls out, you know, the various sectors that will contribute to this greenhouse gas reduction goal. And they explicitly talk a lot about the natural and working lands activities, which is exciting as well. So they talk a lot about reforestation and climate smart ag practices, as well as talking about blue carbon, both for its carbon sequestration benefits as well as climate resilience benefits. In that explanation, they also talk a little bit about how, you know, working again with state governments on forest management and wildfires will be really key to this. And again, just to underscore what Sacha said, you know, they're really drawing on the latest science for this NDC, and really clearly pointing to the recent IPCC report and other scientific reports, and really recognizing that this is the decisive decade and we need to act immediately. So many of you probably all know these state climate commitments better than I do, and think about them regularly given, you know, your day-to-day work. But I just wanted to put this up on the screen to really call out that the Northeast states are, you know, already setting really ambitious greenhouse gas reduction goals. Many setting carbon neutrality or net zero goals by 2050 or 2045. And in setting those goals, the Northeast is also recognizing how critical lands are as part of this puzzle. So again, I won't go through all of this, but just wanted to recognize that, you know, if you look at this column on all the way on the side, it talks through kind of how critical forests or natural and working lands will be to achieving net zero goals, or you know, how offsets will be part of this as well. And specifically, just looking at Connecticut, they're exploring a no net forest loss policy through their forest action plan. So there's a lot of really exciting things already happening across these states. And as earlier speakers talked about, a lot of similarities regionally that we can really draw on and leverage. So at the Alliance, we support this coalition of states on doing more across all sectors. And specifically, my job is to help think about how we can do more in the natural and working land sector. So a few years ago, shortly after we stood up the Alliance, we announced the NWL Challenge, which is really sort of a blueprint or roadmap for states to organize their collective goals and ambition around natural and working lands. So since then, we've seen many states actually explicitly call out the Natural and Working Lands Challenge in executive orders or various policies and programs that they're developing at the state level. But it is really just a way of kind of organizing how do we do as much as we possibly can in this sector, from really improving our greenhouse gas inventories to thinking about how do we advance various programs and policies that touch the various lands of natural and working lands, and how do we integrate this more solidly into our state climate goals and mitigation plans. So that was a really nice sort of framing and commitment that we did. And now we have the job of supporting our states in doing that. And I could not do this job without working really closely with a suite of impact partners, or they're essentially a subset of NGOs that really help us expand our capacity and our reach and our ability to support states. So on the bottom here is our team of impact partners that obviously have their own organizational agenda that they're working on every day, but they also have a US Climate Alliance impact partner hat on, where they really think about, okay, what is the Alliance trying to do with states, and how do we provide that technical expertise to support states as much as possible. So I'll go, I know we want to save some time for discussion, but at the Alliance, because given where we sit, we do our work in many different ways. We provide sort of high-level playbooks and resource guides, but we also provide a lot of direct assistance and technical assistance. And we do regular convening of our states through sort of one-to-one state dialogues, as well as more kind of coalition-wide convenings as well. So Sacha mentioned this briefly, but we have recently stood up, or a couple years ago, we stood up a natural and working lands technical or research grant program, as well as we've provided a lot of technical assistance to our states in many different forms over the past couple years. So specifically, we have done individual sort of state opportunity assessments to kind of identify all the different natural climate solutions pathways that our states could employ, and the associated cost and carbon gain potential of those different pathways. We're also supporting our states and groups of states in answering some of the core research questions that they have. I'm getting a signal to move on. So the last thing I'll just say is, the partnership piece and the convening piece of our states is really critical. And I know states, even with a climate-friendly administration, really benefit from this crosstalk and thinking about how can they scale their solutions to a regional level and really accelerate action. So again, thank you for the opportunity, and I'm really looking forward to any questions you all may have. Thanks, Ned.
Great job, Sacha and Jen. Thank you so much. So we have a few minutes for questions, and while they come in, I will ask the first one. If looking at the Northeast region, what are the top two things that each of you would recommend that we try to do coming out of today's and tomorrow's conference? Sacha, would you start?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll split my my answer, and I'll definitely leave room for Jen. The first is, the forests of the Northeast are not just important resources for us, but are nationally important carbon stores. When we look at the map of carbon stocks on the landscape, the carbon that's standing on the land across the US, we look at both the potential for additional sequestration as well as protecting existing carbon stocks, the northeastern forests stand out. We will not get to our national objectives on natural working lands without securing and increasing carbon in especially the forest lands of the Northeast.
Great.
Full stop.
Okay, great job. Thank you.
I'll stop there.
Jen?
I would echo that. I mean, touching on those state opportunity assessments we did, kind of looking at all the different natural climate solutions pathways for each alliance state, you know, reforestation really stands out. So I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned across these Northeast states about how to do this effectively, how programs can be scaled, and how to collaborate federally. So I think that's the biggest opportunity and could be a real model for the rest of the country.
Very good. Okay. Well, if anyone can put a question in the Q&A box, so feel free to put that in there. But next question from me, what should we do to achieve that goal of protecting Northeast forests? How can we work collectively among Northeast states, government, and private sector? What would be steps 1 and 2, Sacha and Jen?
I went first last time, Jen.
I was going to see what you said. These are very tough questions, so I appreciate it at 7:38 my time. No, I think I was going to talk a little bit about some of the work we're already doing at a regional scale with a group of states with some different agencies that are thinking about, you know, how do we build different sort of forest carbon financing mechanisms and different incentive programs at a regional scale. So I think that kind of continuing on that work, because as I showed with that table, all of these states are acknowledging the deep decarbonization that's needed and the land's contribution. So now they're trying to think, okay, how do we do this collectively? So I think kind of there's a lot of pathways and frameworks already being built. So continuing on those as rapidly as possible, and then thinking about how to kind of roll them up for a federal conversation, I think is really key. But we're already doing some really interesting work regionally to think about forest carbon markets.
Yeah, and I would just sort of add in that if we think about that kind of protect, restore, and manage kind of triad of interventions, there are really important ways that each of them have to touch down to meet this goal. And so bringing finance for carbon on the standing forests, as Jen just mentioned, is super, super important. But then there are other ways to get the other two in ways that align with a whole bunch of other goals. For example, reforesting riparian corridors that increase flood resilience and grow carbon at the same time, I think is part of the long-term state adaptation strategy. And similarly, not to forget the land use and land use change element. We're still losing forests to development. We're still seeing sprawling development patterns. And so making inroads into larger land use patterns and law is really, really critical, but also fundamental to increasing public health and all the other benefits that smarter growth patterns bring with it. So I don't only see this through the lens of carbon.
Okay, that's great. The questions are flooding in now, but we are out of time. I am going to just acknowledge what they are so that we can continue the conversations. They're very important questions. What can we provide as incentives for carbon storage in working lands as well as in non-working lands? What conversations are being had around restoring land to Black, Brown, Indigenous, and poor folks in ways that combat the growing environmental racism, such as so that they can live on the land, have good air and water resources? And what can we do at the local government level as well? So let's keep those questions in mind throughout the next 2 days. Sacha and Jen, you're great. Keep up the great work. Thank you so much. And we'll look forward to the continued dialogue and continued collaboration under your great leadership. So we're going to take a few minutes break. We'll be back at 10:45 for our next panel.